Tonight, thousands arrested as the FBI unleashes the largest gang crackdown in American history.
Nobody expected the break to come from a barbershop in Arlington, Virginia. An FBI analyst named Carla Whitfield had been staring at the same surveillance feed for 6 straight hours, watching the front entrance of a strip mall off Columbia Pike. The barbershop, Estilo Real, with its faded hand-painted sign, had exactly 4 chairs, and as far as anyone could tell, had never once turned a profit. Yet its owner drove a brand new Tahoe and paid rent on 3 apartments across 2 states. That alone wasn't enough to build a case. What Carla noticed that Tuesday afternoon, however, changed everything. Between noon and 4 o'clock, 17 men entered that barbershop. Not one of them left with a haircut. Each stayed for exactly 9 minutes, and every single one of them, upon exiting, placed a phone call that lasted under 20 seconds. Carla didn't know it yet, but she had just stumbled onto the central communication node, a largest MS-13 coordination network the FBI had ever documented. And the operation that would follow, spanning 14 cities, mobilizing thousands of federal agents, and culminating in one of the most sweeping gang crackdowns in American history, was about to begin. But this story doesn't start with Carla. Not really. It starts with blood. 7 months earlier, in Brentwood, Long Island, a 16-year-old named, we'll call him David, disappeared on his walk home from school. His mother reported him missing by nightfall. 3 weeks later, his body was found in a wooded area near a golf course, bearing wounds that investigators said reflected the signature brutality of MS-13 initiation violence. He hadn't been recruited. He'd refused. And for that refusal, according to prosecutors, a local clique decided to make an example of him. David's death was one of 9 murders across Long Island, Northern Virginia, Maryland, and Houston, in a 5-month period that investigators would eventually connect to a single, coordinated directive. Not a local decision, not the impulse of a rogue clique leader, a directive that originated, according to intercepted communications, from MS-13's senior leadership structure, the transnational, operating out of El Salvador, but increasingly embedding command and control operatives on American soil. And this is where the scope of this story starts to warp your sense of what a street gang actually is. MS-13, or Mara Salvatrucha, has been a fixture of American crime for decades. Founded in Los Angeles in the 1980s by Salvadoran immigrants, it spread through deportation cycles and prison networks into Central America, then re-entered the United States in waves. By the mid-2000s, federal estimates placed its U.S. membership at roughly 10,000, with tens of thousands more operating in Honduras, Guatemala, Mexico, and El Salvador. But the organization that investigators encountered in this case had evolved far beyond the loosely connected street cliques of the past. What they found was a gang that had begun functioning like a cartel. The man at the center of this evolution, the figure the FBI designated as Target 1, was a 38-year-old Salvadoran national, operating under the alias Sombra. His real name, according to sealed federal indictments, was fictionally rendered here as Ricardo Menafuentes. He had entered the United States illegally at least 3 times. He had been deported twice, and yet somehow he had built an operational infrastructure that connected MS-13 cliques in 14 American cities into a functioning enterprise capable of coordinating drug distribution, human smuggling, extortion, and targeted violence on a scale previously associated only with the Sinaloa Cartel, or CJNG. How does a man who technically doesn't exist in any legal database build something like that? That's the question FBI or special agent in charge Donald Hargrove asked himself every morning for 8 months. Hargrove, a 23-year bureau veteran who had cut his teeth dismantling mafia families in Philadelphia, had been appointed to lead a newly formed interagency task force codenamed Operation Iron Web. The task force combined FBI gang intelligence units, ICE Homeland Security investigations, or DEA regional field offices, and state and local law enforcement across 7 states. Its mandate was straightforward: map the full extent of MS-13's restructured American network, identify its leadership tier, and dismantle it in a single coordinated strike so devastating that the organization couldn't simply regenerate. Simple mandate, staggering execution. The first real intelligence breakthrough came not from surveillance or wiretaps, but from a defector. In October, a low-level MS-13 member in Houston, a 22-year-old the task force codenamed Sparrow, approached an ICE agent at a routine immigration check-in and said 6 words that would redirect the entire investigation. "They're moving fentanyl now. Lots of it." That sentence cracked the case wide open, because until that moment, the FBI's working theory was that MS-13's American operations were primarily focused on territory control, extortion, and violence for hire. The idea that MS-13 had entered the narcotics trafficking market at a significant scale was considered unlikely by most analysts. The gang didn't have the supply chain connections, it didn't have the logistics infrastructure, it didn't have the cartel relationships necessary to move product in volume, except it did. Sparrow, in exchange for protection and immigration relief for his family, laid out a picture that nobody had anticipated. According to his debriefings, which spanned 60 hours over 3 weeks, Sombra had brokered an agreement with a mid-tier faction of the Sinaloa cartel operating out of Sonora, Mexico. When the terms were elegant in their simplicity, MS-13 would provide manpower for the cartel's human smuggling operations along the southern border, specifically serving as guides and enforcers for migrant smuggling routes through Texas and Arizona. In exchange, the cartel would supply MS-13 with fentanyl pills at wholesale rates, which the gang would then distribute through its existing street-level networks in American cities. Think about what that means for a moment. A Central American street gang and a Mexican drug cartel, two organizations with historically different structures, territories, and even cultural identity, had formed a working alliance. And the commodity binding them together was fentanyl, the deadliest drug to hit American streets in a generation. Sparrow provided names, routes, stash house locations, a communication protocol, and critically, he explained the barbershop system. Each major MS-13 hub city had a relay point, a legitimate business that served as a physical meeting location and communication center. The barbershop in Arlington, a car wash in Hyattsville, Maryland, a pupusa restaurant in Houston's Gulfton neighborhood, a tire shop in Hempstead, Long Island. These locations operated on strict protocols. No phones inside, 9-minute meeting windows, followed by a single outbound call using a rotating set of burner numbers that confirmed receipt of instructions. It was analog espionage technique applied to street-level gang operations, and it had kept the network invisible to digital surveillance for over a year. Once the task force understood the communication architecture, everything accelerated. The FBI's cryptanalysis and cyber division worked with DEA signals intelligence to build a map of the burner phone network. Each call that followed a relay point visit was logged, cross-referenced with cell tower data, and linked to known associates. Over 4 months, analysts identified over 600 individuals across 14 cities who were directly connected to the relay network. The scale was almost incomprehensible. This wasn't a gang. This was a parallel infrastructure, hidden inside American cities, operating in plain sight. And then came the money. Financial investigators from the FBI and IRS Criminal Investigation Division followed the drug proceeds through a labyrinth of cash businesses, prepaid debit cards, and wire transfers. The proceeds from fentanyl sales, estimated at over $40 million annually, were being laundered through a network of shell companies registered in Texas, Florida, and Nevada. The money flowed south through intermediaries in Guatemala, and ultimately to accounts controlled by the transnational in El Salvador. A portion was reinvested into the human smuggling pipeline, creating a self-sustaining cycle. Drugs moved north, money moved south, and desperate migrants were exploited as both cargo and cover. Agent Hargrove later described the moment the full financial picture became clear as the most disturbing day of his career. "We weren't looking at a gang problem anymore," he reportedly told the task force leadership. We were looking at a multinational criminal enterprise that had built itself inside the blind spots of every agency in this country. The decision to move came in early winter. Attorney General Miriam Colston, a fictional name, authorized Operation Iron Web's execution phase after a National Security Council briefing in which DHS Secretary Frank Castellano presented the intelligence packet. The operational plan called for simultaneous pre-dawn raids in 14 cities on a single morning. The logistics alone were staggering. Over 3,000 federal agents from FBI, ICE, DEA, and U.S. Marshals, supplemented by SWAT teams and local police tactical units, would execute more than 400 arrest warrants and 200 search warrants within a 6-hour window. The date was set, and then, 48 hours before execution, something almost destroyed everything. A detective in the Prince William County, Virginia Police Department, we'll call him Victor Stahl, was discovered to have been passing information to a local MS-13 clique leader for over 2 years. Stahl, who worked gang intelligence, had been feeding the clique advance warning of raids and surveillance operations in exchange for cash payments, totaling roughly $80,000. An internal affairs investigation, triggered by an anonymous tip, had been running parallel to Iron Web for 3 months. When Stahl was quietly arrested on a Thursday evening, the task force faced an agonizing question. Had he compromised Iron Web? 48 hours of frantic assessment followed. Analysts reviewed every piece of intelligence Stahl had accessed, and they monitored the relay network for any sign of panic or operational changes. They watched the barbershop, the car wash, the tire shop, Nothing changed. The 9-minute meetings continued. The burner calls went out on schedule. Sombra, wherever he was, didn't know what was coming. The green light held. At 4:17 in the morning on a cold Wednesday, Operation Iron Web went live. Across the country, in a rolling wave timed to account for time zone, federal agents and SWAT teams hit their targets. The first breach occurred in Brentwood, Long Island, where an FBI tactical team executed a no-knock warrant on a 2-story colonial that served as a stash house. Inside, agents found 14 MS-13 members, 11 handguns, and a hidden compartment beneath the basement stairs containing approximately 200,000 fentanyl pills, enough to kill every resident of Suffolk County several times over. In Houston, ICE Homeland Security Investigations teams simultaneously raided 9 locations across the Gulfton and Southwest neighborhoods. The Pupusa restaurant yielded not only 3 high-ranking MS-13 operatives, but a basement server room containing encrypted communications equipment that investigators believe was used to coordinate human smuggling logistics across the Texas border. Federal agents also discovered financial records meticulously kept in handwritten ledgers. Sombra's organization, for all its sophistication, still maintained old-school accounting as a backup against digital seizure. The Arlington barbershop fell at 4:22. 2 MS-13 members were arrested inside. More importantly, agents seized a lockbox containing 47 prepaid phones and a handwritten codebook that would allow analysts to retroactively decode months of intercepted communications. In Maryland, Northern Virginia, Boston, Charlotte, Nashville, Atlanta, Los Angeles, San Francisco, Denver, Phoenix, Dallas, and 2 additional cities. The pattern repeated with remarkable precision. Federal agents breached doors, executed warrants, seized evidence, and processed arrests at a pace that later drew comparisons to the largest coordinated law enforcement actions since the post-September 11th terrorism sweep. By noon, the numbers were historic. Over 2,000 MS-13 members and associates had been arrested. The charges ranged from racketeering and narcotics trafficking to murder conspiracy, human trafficking, money laundering, and illegal weapons possession. Agents had seized roughly 3 tons of narcotics, including fentanyl, methamphetamine, cocaine, and heroin. They had seized over $15 million in cash and assets. They had recovered more than 400 firearms, and they had liberated 23 individuals, including 7 minors, from human trafficking situations connected to the smuggling pipeline. But Sombra wasn't among the arrested. Not yet. The manhunt for Ricardo Menafuentes lasted 11 days. Acting on intelligence extracted from the seized communications equipment and decoded through the Arlington codebook, FBI agents tracked Sombra to a rural property outside Fredericksburg, Virginia. He had been hiding in a converted barn on land owned by a woman who, investigation later revealed, had no idea who her tenant actually was. She thought he was a farmhand. When the FBI's hostage rescue team approached the barn at dawn, Sombra didn't run. He didn't fight. According to agents on scene, he was sitting at a folding table eating breakfast, a cheap radio playing regional Mexican music. He looked up at the tactical team and said, in accented English, "I wondered when." The aftermath of Operation Iron Web rippled outward for months. Federal prosecutors filed RICO charges against the core leadership structure, linking the American network directly to the transnational's command authority. Diplomatic pressure intensified on El Salvador and Guatemala. The Sinaloa cartel faction that had partnered with MS-13 found itself under renewed DEA scrutiny, with several key operatives indicted in absentia. Detective Victor Stahl pleaded guilty to corruption charges and was sentenced to 12 years in federal prison. And in communities from Long Island to Los Angeles, residents who had lived under the shadow of MS-13 intimidation for years described a shift they could feel. In Brentwood, a community organizer told reporters that for the first time in a decade, teenagers were walking to school without looking over their shoulders. In Houston's Gulfton, a Salvadoran-American business owner who had paid extortion for 3 years hung an American flag outside her shop the day after the raids. Small gestures, but they mattered. This operation didn't end MS-13. No single law enforcement action ever ends an organization rooted in poverty, displacement, and generational trauma. The gang will recruit. It will rebuild. The forces that created it, civil wars, economic desperation, broken immigration systems, the insatiable American appetite for narcotics, haven't gone anywhere. But Operation Iron Web did something that mattered. It proved that when federal agencies stop working in silos, when intelligence is shared across jurisdictions, when the political will exists to treat a transnational gang with the same seriousness as a cartel or a terrorist network, the results can be extraordinary. 3,000 agents, 14 cities, 1 morning, and a criminal empire that thought it was invisible, suddenly exposed to daylight. The barbershop on Columbia Pike is closed now. The sign still hangs, faded and peeling. Someone spray-painted "Gone" across the front window in red letters. Nobody has bothered to clean it off. Maybe nobody wants to. Maybe it serves as a reminder that the most dangerous operations in America don't always hide in tunnels or fortresses. Sometimes they hide behind 4 barber chairs and a hand-painted sign in a strip mall you'd drive past without a second glance. If this story matters to you, share it, because the next network is already forming in the next barbershop, the next car wash, the next tire shop, and the only question is whether anyone is watching. This has been a fictional dramatization. The events, characters, and specific operational details depicted are not real. They are inspired by documented patterns in federal law enforcement operations and the ongoing challenge of transnational gang activity in the United States. Stay informed, stay aware,